Hey everyone, welcome to our evening tonight, our virtual event. I am Heather B. Moore and I'm here with Rebecca Connolly, and I'm just going to let Rebecca introduce herself, and then we're going to share a few little gems of how we met and how we've been connected over the past several years.
I'm Rebecca Connolly. For those who don't know me, I am the author of A Brilliant Night of Stars and Ice, which released last week, April 5th. And today we are celebrating the 110th anniversary of the Titanic sinking. And it was amazing to realize that I would be releasing this book this month of this anniversary. And I think it makes it even more special for me now that I know and appreciate so much more about the Titanic as a ship, as a tragedy, and the details that followed. I am coming from you live from Indiana, where I live, where it is 8:00 p.m., a little bit different from where Heather is right now.
I have the afternoon sun blaring on me right now.
The sun in her eyes, and I don't have any sun at all anymore. Heather and I go back a few years now. Mm-hmm. When did we first connect? Was it 2016?
I'd have to count back. Yeah, I mean, I'd say 6-7 years at least. Yeah, we were in an anthology group, and so before we even met each other, we were kind of working together and publishing.
Yeah.
And then you were coming out to my state. I'm in Utah. And I can't remember how it all worked out, but we ended up just meeting. Was it for breakfast? We met?
Yeah, we met up. I was in town for a conference, I think. Okay. And we met up, I think, to get the audio for that anthology.
Yeah.
It's all coming back to me now. We met up to get the audio for that anthology. That was the first time we met in person. And then was it later that year, or was it the year after that we were at another conference together?
Oh, yeah. I think it was probably, I felt like I knew you for about a year.
Yeah.
And we ended up being roommates at another conference in Denver. So it was just all and then that's where I think we really felt like we started to get to know each other. And
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah, so when Shadow Mountain invited me to do this event for the anniversary, they asked who I wanted to have on here with me, and Heather was the first person to come to mind. She is a trailblazer for me, and especially gifted in historical fiction, and so it was only fitting that she should kind of be our MC tonight. If we have one.
And when Rebecca asked me, I thought, well, I love the Titanic. And I'm like, well, of course I read her book. I mean, I actually was able to read it before she submitted. I was one of her beta readers on A Brilliant Night of Stars and Ice. And when it was accepted, and she submitted to a publisher I had just barely started working with, Shadow Mountain. And I remember when she got accepted, I don't know, I feel like it was in my book, but I felt that excited.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it was so fun. And then you just feel like when it does get accepted, the wait is usually over a year before your book comes out. And so the wait feels so long. So now it's here, it's in stores this month, it's all over online, anywhere you can grab it. The audio, I've been listening to the audio, and I'm just a big audio reader. So even if I read a book before it was published or whatever, when the audio comes out, I always just grab it anyway and start listening.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a different adventure when you do it that way. You're hearing someone tell it.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a production. It really is.
Yeah. Well, and in this case, it's two people. There are two narrators for this book, which I think is amazing. And the book is so blessed to have that. I think it's absolutely perfect for it. So you should grab that as soon as you can, even if you have the book, whatever your preferred version is, whether it's hardcover or ebook. Get the audiobook too, because that's as close as we are to any kind of a film production right now. So
right, and when you told me it was on pre-order and Audible, I went and I stalked the narrators, because I'm a big narrator.
I do too.
And I listened to some of the samples of their other stuff. I'm like, okay, they're both really good. I approve.
They are so good. I wish I knew the narrators personally. I want to send them like some kind of floral arrangement or chocolate basket or something. They are so good.
Well, I'm about probably halfway through the book. So, and it's
Okay.
great. So,
Good.
and just as the audio portion. So we just want to welcome, there's a couple people. We may not be able to see all the comments yet, but I can see Holly's here and Mara's here and Melissa is here. So welcome. And I just wanted to say that kind of what we're focusing on tonight is not only talking about Rebecca's book, of course, which is based on the story of the Carpathia, which was the ship that answered the call to Titanic's distress. And then also we'll talk about the Titanic. So if you do have questions, throw them in the comments and we'll see if we have time to get to them. If not, then I'm sure Rebecca will go back and answer at her leisure.
Yeah, happy to. Happy to.
So this is a question I know I've heard you answer it before because I think I asked you, of course. But tell us why you chose this topic to write about and kind of what led to that process of actually sitting down to write about it.
Sure. So for years and years, I have been a massive fan of anything to do with England, Ireland, and Scotland. And I was able to go on a trip with a friend of mine and her parents in 2015. And we went on kind of our own little tour of the British Isles. Started in Ireland, took a ferry across, did some driving up, and then ferried across to Northern Ireland. And tried to do fun things in every place that we visited. And one of the top things to do in Belfast, Northern Ireland, was the Titanic Museum. Now, Belfast is where the Titanic was built. That's where the offices of Harland and Wolff were. And that's where it was built, as well as its sister ship, the Olympic. So they've got this great big museum. It's more like an experience. They've got a great account on social media, so on Instagram and things like that. Shout out to Titanic Belfast. And their experience there is phenomenal. They take you through the different classes, staterooms, facilities. They take you through the building of the Titanic, all of these details, and then they actually take you through the maiden voyage, dates and experiences. Even dropping the temperature in the room that talks about the iceberg. It's amazing how they do this. And there was one room that was the communication room, and it had, as part of the, I'll say wallpaper, I don't know what it really was, on the walls there, as part of the wall was the collection of all of the Marconi messages that had been sent out and received and transmitted at the time between ships, not just Titanic, but other ships as well. And then it all kind of funnels towards, the end of the room. And you can see kind of the different discussions going on and kind of all funneling down to just the distress call. The CQD was the distress call at the time. And I remember just going through that and just seeing this communication, and it reminded me of 9/11. You read those stories of the last messages between people, the last communications that you hear from some of the flights there. That immediately came to my mind. That was the only thing that I could ever relate to that. I was 15, I think, in 9/11. And so I remember how poignantly those messages and reading that experience of those last messages, final recordings and the like, how that impacted me. And that all came back to me when I was in this room. And finally, the last message there was CQD, CQD, CQ, and then it was cut off.
Wow.
And that was it. There was no more messages. Nobody heard another word from Titanic. And I just stared at that message and imagined what the person on the other end of that message, I can't remember which ship it was to, but whoever was hearing that and heard the cutoff and then couldn't get them again, what that person must have been feeling. That's not a captain of a ship. That's a 20-something-year-old sitting on the other end of a radio set.
Right.
Hearing that. And that had such an impact on me. And it was all I could do to kind of leave that room and round the corner into the rescue room. And it talks about who was saved, the experiences of those getting pulled aboard the Carpathia from the lifeboats, those who died in the lifeboats, and it, mentioned the Carpathia, and I'd never really paid attention to the ship that rescued anybody. So I was like, oh, the Carpathia. Okay, good to know. And then I saw a picture and a little plaque talking about Captain Arthur Rostron. It was the captain of the Carpathia, and I knew I had never heard his name before. So I just stared at it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder, what their story was to get there, hearing the message. Why were they the ones that got there? I couldn't tell you what the placard said. I haven't been back to Belfast since. I should go because I love Belfast. But when I went home from that trip, I remember thinking a few weeks later, what was the name of that ship again? And so I looked up on, I don't know, Wikipedia or something, what the name of the ship was. And it was, the Carpathia and Captain Arthur Rostron. And that's where I discovered the incredible story of how Carpathia even came to hear the message and to be there. And I just read it and I could not believe it. It was absolutely incredible. It shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have actually heard the message, let alone be able to get there when they did. But it happened. And it was just incredible. And I just thought, this story needs to be told. And I wanted to be the one to tell it. And it's taken me a few years to figure out the best way to do that. But it's a story that's been living in my mind and in my heart ever since.
Well, I mean, from a reader's point of view, I've been a reader long before I ever wrote anything. Thank you for writing it. I love to learn about history this way. I have a hard time with, I do read a lot of nonfiction, but I feel like when I'm reading a true story that's fleshed out into novel, I feel like it just becomes a lot more personal, and you begin to relate to the different characters. And I remember reading the story and thinking about all of these people on there, and obviously, we know starting the story what happens to the Titanic, but now you're reading a point of view with all these things that are slowly happening and slowly unfolding for people on the Carpathia that are just, they're desperate to get there. They're going as fast as their old ship can take them.
Yeah. Carpathia was 12 years old, which is ancient according to ships. Titanic was brand spanking new, best technology out there, and Carpathia is just that kind of old trusty, doing just fine. But of all the ships that were in the vicinity that night, I doubt anybody would have predicted Carpathia being the one to get there or to be the rescue ship. I don't know that anybody would have pegged it going on its merits as a ship alone.
Yeah, I agree. So we have a few more that have joined us: Dixie, Julie, Kim, and Jason. So let's start with some of their questions. Oh, this is actually both Dixie and Julie has this. If you have found the link between you and one of the main characters, Kate Connolly, so just update us on the progress, because I know you've been searching for that link.
I have been searching. So when I decided to write the story of the Carpathia, I knew that in order to get the story to really shine and to really make the impact that it needed to, I needed a point of view on the Titanic. And my dad pointed out that I think a colleague had mentioned to him that there was a Connolly on the Titanic. And so he was like, we might be related to them. So I looked into it and I found Kate Connolly, Catherine Connolly from County Cavan, Ireland. And County Cavan neighbors County Monaghan, where according to our family records, my family is from. So we were like, we could be related. Yeah. We could be. In learning Kate's story, I am so indebted to the brilliant minds at Encyclopedia Titanica. They have stories on everybody that they possibly can. Some people's stories are very little, just that they were, born here, this family, their ticket number was this, and they were rescued in this boat. But other people told their stories, and these dedicated minds found them. And Kate was one of those where they had a little bit more to her story. And I was just touched by it. And I knew that she was my second lead.
Yeah.
And I believe that we have one of Kate Connolly's grandchildren joining us tonight. I'm not going to mention their names. We'll leave them that privacy, but I was able to connect with a couple of Kate Connolly's grandchildren, and that has been a definite blessing.
Wow.
I have yet to find the actual connection between Kate Connolly's line and my own, but if anybody has ever spent any time in Ireland, you will know that there are Connollys everywhere. So it might be more of a needle in a haystack, because apparently we all have the most common Irish name in existence, and none of us are particularly original with the given names, the Christian names of our children, because there's a proud history of Catholicism in several of the lines. And so we all have very traditional names, which makes it very hard for we descendants to figure out where we go there. So I don't know if I'm a blood relative in a direct sense, but Kate Connolly definitely has a special place in my heart and in my family, and she's family to me.
Yeah, and I think because there are a lot of times when you go way back, and it's amazing what connections you can find. So maybe you'll find it eventually, but if not, I agree that there still is a connection between the two of you. So we have a very poignant and serious question from Jason, right? He said, were there gummy bears on either ship? If so, what colors? And if not, why?
I don't believe there were gummy bears on either ship. When I researched the food and drink on board Titanic, I did not see gummy bears anywhere on there, and that could be part of the problem.
Yeah, they would definitely float, right?
I think they would definitely float. They probably could have plugged some of the holes.
And then let's see. Oh, and then Mara commented, definitely divine intervention helped the Carpathia. And I definitely believe in that as well.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things in reading Rebecca's book that I felt this is just, there had to be a helping hand in there.
And Arthur Rostron was a very religious man. And one of the first things he did after ordering the ship to be turned and for the message to be relayed to Titanic that they were coming, one of the first things that he did was kneel down and pray for guidance, for direction, for assistance. And there are accounts from others who witnessed him taking a moment to bow his head, remove his hat from his head, and just saw his lips moving with his eyes closed. And they, respected his moment of prayer. And he said on one occasion, or several occasions really, that their entire voyage in that night was absolutely providential. And then he was reported to have said for a newspaper article at one point that he could only conclude that there was another hand at the helm than his. And I so appreciated his willingness to acknowledge the hand of heaven in his actions, to not claim all the honor for himself, to not even claim it for his crew. He praised his crew, he praised his officers, he praised everybody, and knew that, earthly hands had to bring about, heaven's work. But he never said that it was all them. And that was one of the reasons why I needed him to be my lead character. He is an incredible human being. And if I can do anything in a small way to bring his name back into public attention, then I will have claimed this book as a success, regardless of anything else.
Oh, I definitely think it'll be counted as that, if not already. So this is what I'm wondering too, because I always like to know, kind of what things didn't make it into the book. Maybe some things you uncovered, either Titanic or Carpathia related, that you thought, well, I wish I had room, or it didn't quite fit with the plot you were creating.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear any tidbits.
My favorite scene for the early drafts of this book didn't make it into the final cut because the character that is involved in it is not one of my leads. And that's Harold Cottam, the radio guy on Carpathia, the one who heard the message. He was unlacing his boots, getting ready for bed, and he was listening for messages. They were nearing the range of Cape Race, one of the land stations. And for the ships that didn't have as great of the wireless capabilities, they would tune in to these land stations to hear if there were any messages from other ships, from other land stations that had been waiting there for them. So he was listening to these messages to see if there were any for him. And he didn't have to do this. He was getting ready for bed. He was just kind of like, oh, I wonder if there are any messages. And he was unlacing his boots and listening. And he heard that there were a lot of messages for Titanic. And he knew the guy on Titanic, Jack Phillips. So he decided, oh, you know what? We're in range of Titanic. I'll radio Jack and see, if he knows that there's messages. So he radios over to Jack Phillips on Titanic and says, I believe he said, hey, old man, which is code. It's not calling him an old man. Hey, old man, did you know you have a lot of messages at Cape Race? And he gets the message back that Titanic has hit an iceberg and is sinking and needs help. And he kind of sends it back like, are you sure? And he says, yes. And he said, should I tell my captain? And he says, yes. And then he was given a position. So that's when he runs and goes and tells the first officer, and they go and wake up the captain. Now, waking up the captain is in the book, but because I don't have Harold Cottam as a character, as a lead character with a point of view in the book, I could not have that scene. Just like I also could not have the scene of Harold receiving the last message, the cutoff message that I spoke about earlier. Now, I don't remember. I don't believe the Carpathia was the ship that heard that one, but for dramatic license, I used it. And so those were some of my favorite scenes that didn't make it in there. But there were all sorts of stories of Titanic survivors and Titanic victims. And as I was researching the Kate Connolly side of things and looking at her friends and their stories and the people in their boats, each one of them had a story. I'm not sure that anything touched me more than a little boy named Arthur Olson. He was about 6 or 7. And he was put into Lifeboat 13 by his father. Men were not allowed in the lifeboats at this point unless they were part of the crew, really, that were going to help row and direct the ships or the lifeboats. And so Mr. Olson puts his little boy in the boat and adjusts his hat. And he tells him, be a good boy, Artie. It may be a long time before I see you. And he tells the others in the boat, what the little boy's name is. And then he leaves. He just backs through the crowd. And he was not rescued. The little boy was in the boat and he was fine. The others took care of him. But just that scene, it just killed me. That little boy just not understanding what's going on and having to say goodbye to his father. There's a little girl named Ruth. I can't remember what her last name is, but her mother was frantically trying to get all 3 of her children into the lifeboats, and she had her 2 youngest with her. And Ruth, she didn't have another hand for, and so they were kind of being put into boat, I want to say 15, but it might have been 11. And she said, Ruth, get in a boat. And so Ruth just walks calmly over to boat 13 and asks if she can get in. And she gets put in the boat, separate from her mother and her siblings, but they were all safe and that was fine. There's a woman who, when on board Carpathia, had 3 of her children with her, but she was looking for 7 more.
Wow.
She had 10 children with her. And I wish I knew her name, but this is from others' accounts, and so I don't know her name. And as far as the records go, there's no proof that she found any more of her children. One of the things I love about this book is that all of those little stories that you read about almost in passing, those are all real. Those are all accounts from survivors, things that they overheard or their own experiences. And each one of those is a story of love, of loss. There's so much. There are so many people that have a story on the Titanic. And I don't know if this will be a spoiler or not, but there was another Catherine Connolly on board the Titanic from County Tipperary. And she did not survive. She and two of her friends did not survive. One of them did. One of them got to a lifeboat, but because of the assurances from others that everything was fine and there was no need to panic, there was nothing wrong. Because of that, the other Kate Connolly and her friends, most of her friends, died with the ship. And they were all going to America for, a new life, to start over part-time in Ireland. And their story ended right there 110 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was the hard part, is learning that they're not just names on a list of survivors or victims. There's a story for everybody, not just the unsinkable Molly Brown, who I adore, not just John Jacob Astor, who was the richest man on board Titanic and died, not just the Duff Gordons and the infamous boat number 1, not just them, but every life lost and every life saved, young or old, had a story.
Yeah.
That was hard.
Well, thank you for that. It just kind of brings more elements to the story. And I think that, just like you said, there's so many stories out there, and they all came together on this single terrible night.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the questions. Oh, Julie said, did all the officers and sailors aboard the Carpathia keep sailing? So I don't know how much research you did kind of after the event.
Yeah. A lot of them spent at least a couple more years at sea. Some of them would then go on to leave and do other things with their lives, go into some of them went into like the mercantile navy. Some went into more land-based businesses, but a lot of them did keep sailing and continued on in their careers. So that was cool to see what they had done. And some of the surviving Titanic officers went on to continue to have seafaring careers as well.
Yeah.
There was, oh goodness, why can't I remember his name? Lightoller.
Okay.
Second officer Lightoller from Titanic. He actually went on to be one of the boats that answered the call for help at Dunkirk.
Wow.
He was not in the Navy. He was not captain of a ship, but when England sent out a call asking people with fishing boats to go and help, he was one of those that went to Dunkirk to save the soldiers from the beaches. So that's kind of cool. So he went on to save others.
Yeah.
So
wow. Oh, and then Emily came on and she said, in your research, did you see the museum exhibits? And you talked about how you saw the one over in Belfast, but what about beyond that?
Actually, I was able to go to the Titanic exhibit in Las Vegas. I did that was that November? And Heather went with me on that one. We were at a conference. And that was extraordinary. I absolutely loved that. And it had been, 7 years since I'd been to a Titanic exhibit.
Yeah.
And so it brought back a lot of those memories, but also had some different things. One of the things that I'll never forget was, I don't know if you remember this, Heather, but the picture and the display of all those little casserole dishes.
Oh, yeah.
That were all lined up in the sand, almost like they had just kind of tipped over into the sand like that. They were still like almost perfectly in line with each other in the sand. And that was just amazing to see, just to look at that and go, oh my gosh, you know, with all that the ship did, that's how those landed in the sand on the bottom of the ocean. And to look at a model of the wreck and to see how long that gash was from the iceberg. Because we tend to think, oh, it just bumped it. No, it tore apart the bottom of that ship. And to walk along the mock-up promenade deck that had the cold night air and the stars. And I was so happy that they had the stars like that, because that's one of the big things, is that it was such a clear night and there were so many stars. That the water was so clear and calm. And then the awesome thing about the Vegas exhibit is that it has something that's called the big piece, an actual part of the ship. And I'll post a picture of this later. But our friend Jen Johnson got a picture of me standing there staring at this big piece of the actual Titanic. And I just cried, just standing there. All of these people that I had been studying and writing about all came back to my mind, and I could hear the screams, I could hear the crying, I could hear the panic, I could hear the creaking of the davits and the lines, and I could hear all of that just staring at this piece of ship, and it was just astonishing. And then to go into the final part of that exhibit and to find Kate Connolly on the Wall of Survivors was it was just phenomenal. So if you ever get a chance to see any of the traveling Titanic exhibits, or I believe Branson, Missouri also has one. I have not been out to that one yet. Go there. If you're ever in Northern Ireland, go to Belfast. If you're ever in Southampton, go to anything Titanic you can. I don't know where the other Titanic exhibits are. I've heard that Halifax has some fun things. If there's ever anything Titanic related, go. Just go.
Definitely. I agree. And so Karen said, was there anything ever confirmed about the ship that was closer to the Titanic but did not respond to the call for help? Wasn't that the Californian?
It was so it's a bit of a pickle even now. So at the time, the Californian was supposedly the closest ship. And there's a little bit of there's a discrepancy. There's also conspiracy theorists. You can kind of pick your poison here. A lot of the ships did not have a radio man on all night, so they wouldn't necessarily have heard the distress calls, but some that were in the vicinity might have seen the distress rockets. Just kind of depends. So it was widely thought to be the Californian, and that things were just ignored. And there was a whole investigation into it. Captain Lord basically lost his career over this, and kind of became one of the most hated men around, even though nothing could ever be proven. And he continued to claim his innocence there. They couldn't ever recover the logbook from the Californian to prove their position. But in recent years, there's been more of an interest in the Mount Temple that was also close. And there's now a significant belief that it was actually the Mount Temple that did not answer and was seen in the distance. So that's one of those mysteries in history that the truth may never be known until we're all on the other side and someone can point it out to us in a nice lesson. Great big conference.
We can time travel.
Right. We'll have a great big conference on the other side. It's just, you can go to this class if you want to know what ship was in the distance in the Titanic. You can go to this one if you want to know, I don't know, pick your other lesser known things, out there. So it depends on who you talk to.
So because the Carpathia, they were how many hours away? Like it took them, was it
4 hours?
4 hours? 4 hours?
4 hours to get there going top speed.
To reach there. So you think of in that time frame of what could have happened if a ship had been closer, like how many more people could have been rescued.
Right.
It was really just devastating to think that somehow, like you said, maybe distress calls weren't heard or for whatever reason.
Yeah. So in this book, I went with the understandings and beliefs at the time. I thought that was the best option there. The accounts from those that were there, their thoughts and their feelings on the subject on those ships, and went with that. But I was very careful not to take a stance.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing. It's a little bit of a challenge when you are writing historical fiction, is because it's fiction, so you do have some latitude, but you also want to stay as true to the story, because why make up something when you have a framework there? And but you do sometimes have to make those choices and I usually do the same thing. I choose the most believed or most supported, even if I'm not 100% sure if it's the right one, because sometimes we just, like you said, we won't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Oh, Mary came on and she said, "Thank you for honoring my grandma's story. You're able to capture her spirit as I grew up knowing." That's awesome.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Mary Arkins Krant, granddaughter of Kate Connolly. Thank you, Mary. Awesome. That's an honor to know.
Okay, so I have another question. I would love to hear about what you are working on next.
I am working on another historical fiction. I won't go too much into it. It's set in World War I in Belgium. And it's another incredible story of kind of unsung heroes. And it's amazing to work on. So I've got that coming. Also getting back to some of my romances. My fans will be happy to hear that. I have a couple of those coming up down the line, and we'll see how much I can get done this year. It's been busy.
It's always a challenge. Like, should I write or should I sleep?
Right? I know. Should I write or should I talk to people?
Right. It's always, you're weighing it all the time.
I know. So you can't win. You can't win. There's always a story to tell. And there's always something else you could be doing.
Let's do one final question. And I get this a lot, and I'm sure you do too, but just kind of walk us through, like, when you're preparing to write a book, like your current book or a book in the future, are you plotting it out? Are you doing research for a month before? Are you kind of meshing it together? Like, how does your system work?
So for something like this historical fiction, I think it's important to get all of the research done before you get started, because there is a timeline to follow in a story that already exists.
True.
And so you want to get as much information as you can so that you can lay it out. Your story needs an arc. And in a situation like this where you're not creating that arc, you have to kind of honor what's there. You have a lot of wiggle room with a lot of things in historical fiction, but where there is an existing arc, you kind of have to build it. So you need to find all of the details and build it. You need to have enough information to get the details right. So your setting, so for my current work, what was Belgium like in 1914? Okay, let's figure that one out. And what were people wearing in 1914? And, what was going on in the world in 1914? Well, it was World War I. Okay, so what are the details of World War I that I need to know for this? How did World War I impact Belgium? I need to know those things because that's the foundation of this story. And then you need to, narrow it down to your specific characters, their specific arc, their specific journey. Okay, what happened here? Who are the significant people in this story? When do I need to introduce them into this story? And kind of laying all of that out so that your story has the most impact that it's supposed to have, that you're telling the story that's really there. And sometimes you really don't know that until you get almost to the end, and then you see it and you're like, I have all of these characters that are only in here for about 2 minutes. And I'm not sure that they need to be in it at all, because they're, it's the baker and he really doesn't do anything. There's just this cute little story that I thought was going to be important, but now that we're nearing the end, it might not need to be in there. So there's a lot of give and take with that. So that's kind of the fun thing about historical fiction. It's a bit of a puzzle. And I like puzzles. I get frustrated with puzzles, but I like puzzles when I'm in a groove. And so that's kind of the challenge there for me. I don't know how other people do it. That's just how I do it. And when I'm doing something that's not historical fiction, I will do the necessary research ahead of time for that particular story. There's some things I don't have to research anymore because I've written a lot of stories in the same time period. But if I'm talking about a very specific career or a very specific county in England, I need to do a little bit of research, and I just do enough to get me started, and then I'll kind of research as I go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, awesome. I just think it's always fascinating to hear from authors about how, because when you see the finished project, I mean, you think, wow, how do they do all this? But you don't, but it really is like a puzzle. It really is fitting together parts of the story and then going back and seeing if it still works or not.
And it's a deep dive. It's intense.
Yeah.
It is not, this is scuba diving. I've been snorkeling for years, and this is deep scuba diving, and I did not get the training that I needed here. So I'm learning a lot as I go.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been so fun to talk to you, and it's so fun to hear more about your story. And a lot of it I knew, but I also learned a few nuggets that I hadn't heard before. But for those of you who are commenting, who are listening later, Rebecca will jump on and answer questions that weren't answered during this virtual event. And we just want to say thank you to everybody and have a great weekend and a great rest of your month.
Thank you, guys. And remember to remember the Titanic, not just as a movie with famous people in it. Remember it for the tragedy as well, but also the stories of hope that were there. Sometimes we think of Titanic as a party theme, and it's so much more than that. It's deeper than that. And we don't have to be depressed about the Titanic, but the significance of it deserves to be honored. And I hope that in reading A Brilliant Night of Stars and Ice and listening to the most excellent audiobook, and in revisiting this story that we all think we know, I hope that it will bring a new appreciation to all of us for what this event meant to the history of the world. And I'd like to thank Shadow Mountain for putting this together tonight. It's been great to think and remember the Titanic today on this 110th anniversary.
Thanks, everyone.